My name is Vivian Calloway. I'm 34, and last spring my wages were garnished for a $410,000 loan I never signed. My parents had forged my signature to guarantee my brother's failing brewery, and when I refused to keep silent about it, they didn't apologize. They called me ungrateful. They called me the problem. But I had something they didn't count on: 11 months of saved emails, a forensic handwriting expert, and a mediation hearing where the truth had nowhere left to hide. My name is Vivian Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and 8 months ago I opened my mailbox to find a wage garnishment notice for $410,000, a business loan I never signed, for a brewery I've never once set foot inside as anything but a customer. The letter was from my employer's payroll department, forwarded from a collections agency, and it took me 3 read-throughs before the words stopped rearranging themselves into something that made sense. Before I tell you how I found the forged signature and what happened in the mediation room that finally broke my family open, take a second and hit that like button, but only if this story is actually landing for you. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you can't understand how a family ends up here without understanding how it started. There were 2 Calloway children growing up in Beaverton, Oregon, me and my younger brother Chase. From the time we were small, everyone in a 10-mile radius knew which one was going to make it. Chase was electric. He walked into a room and people leaned toward him without knowing why. He was the kid who got invited to every birthday party, the teenager every teacher wanted to mentor, the young man who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket and somehow leave the officer smiling. My mother, Diane, used to say Chase had the Calloway charm, as if it were a gene that had simply skipped me. I was the other kind of child, quiet, exacting, more comfortable with blueprints than small talk. I became a landscape architect, not because it was glamorous, but because I loved the precision of it, the way a drainage plan either works or it doesn't, the way a retaining wall either holds or it fails, with no ambiguity. No charm required. I built my own firm from nothing, one client at a time, over 11 years of unglamorous, unpraised work. When I signed the lease on my first office space at 29, I called home to share the news. My father, Roland, listened for exactly the length of time it took him to ask, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Chase is opening a brewery?" That was the pattern. Every milestone I reached was a doorway that led directly back to Chase. When I finished my licensing exam, my mother asked if I'd met anyone yet, because Chase's girlfriend at the time was just delightful. When I bought my first house, modest, 3 bedrooms, paid for entirely with my own savings, my parents visited once, complimented the landscaping I'd designed myself, and spent the rest of dinner discussing how Chase's brewery idea was the kind of vision this family needed. Chase's brewery, Copperline Ales, opened when he was 26. My parents had put up $70,000 from their savings to help him start it. A gift, not a loan, they were quick to clarify whenever I asked. I never asked for anything close to that when I started my firm. I built it on a business line of credit I qualified for myself, paid down within 4 years, interest and all. No one congratulated me for that. No one ever does congratulate the child who simply does what she said she'd do. I want to be fair to who Chase actually was, because this isn't a story about a villain born fully formed. He wasn't cruel by nature. He was, if anything, the product of being told his entire life that charm was a currency that would always be enough, that someone else would quietly absorb the difference whenever the math didn't work out in his favor. My parents built that belief in him one small accommodation at a time. The late homework excused because he was just so busy socially. The fender bender at 17 paid off without a single consequence attached. The college semester he failed and simply retook on our parents' dime while I worked 2 jobs to cover my own tuition gap. None of those moments were on their own dramatic, but they added up year after year into a man who genuinely believed consequences were something that happened to other people, and parents who believed protecting him from those consequences was simply what good parents did. For the first few years, Copperline did well enough that Chase had a gift for hospitality, if he had no real gift for spreadsheets. He hired people who liked him, expanded too fast, and by the time he was 30, the brewery was carrying debt that outpaced its revenue by a wide and worsening margin. I knew some of this because family dinners had become, in the last 2 years, an endless loop of Chase's next big move: a second tap room, a canning line, a distribution deal that always seemed to be 6 weeks from closing, and never did. 18 months ago, Chase asked me directly for a loan, $60,000 to cover payroll while he waited on a distributor contract. I said no, not because I didn't have it, I did, but because Chase still owed me $12,000 from 3 years ago, money borrowed for emergency equipment repairs that I never saw again and was never thanked for. When I brought that up, my mother called the same night, her voice already thick with disappointment before I'd said a word. "You have a good job, Vivian. Your brother is trying to build something. Why can't you just help him the way we've always helped each other in this family?" I asked her what "we" meant, since I'd never once been on the receiving end of that kind of help. She didn't answer the question. She never did. 6 months after that, Chase asked me to co-sign an equipment lease for a new canning line. I declined and explained, the way I explain things to clients who don't understand a permit denial, that co-signing meant I would be legally responsible if he defaulted, and that I wasn't willing to take on that liability for a business I had no oversight of. My father's response was to stop calling for nearly a month. Silence, precise and deliberate, the same tool he'd used on me since I was a teenager who preferred books to pep rallies. I missed Chase's 20th birthday party for a client presentation I couldn't reschedule without losing the contract. I sent a gift, called to apologize, and 2 days later saw a photo my mother posted from the party with the caption, "Some people show up for family, others show up for themselves." 41 likes. My cousin Renata commented, "Some people never change." After that, I started keeping a folder. Every request, every refusal, every guilt-laced message that followed. I called it plainly family correspondence. I told myself it was just organizational habit, the same instinct that made me double-check every drainage calculation twice. I didn't yet know it would become the single most important folder I ever created. The envelope that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday in March. Standard payroll department stationery, forwarded from my company's HR office with a sticky note that read, "Vivian, this came to us. Please contact HR ASAP." Inside was a wage garnishment order from a commercial lender, Cascade Business Capital, citing an outstanding personal guarantee on a business loan in the amount of $410,000, originated 14 months earlier for the benefit of Copperline LLC. My name was listed as co-guarantor, Vivian R. Calloway. I had never heard of Cascade Business Capital. I had never signed a guarantee for my brother's brewery. I had never even seen the inside of a loan document with my brother's business on it. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter 4 more times, waiting for it to resolve into something that made sense. It never did. I called the lender directly. The representative on the phone was pleasant, unbothered, entirely unaware she was about to detonate something in my chest. "Yes, Miss Calloway, you're listed as personal guarantor on this loan. The application was submitted and notarized on January 9th of last year. Would you like me to pull the documents for you?" I told her there had to be some mistake. She told me, gently, that the signature on file matched the name provided, and that the loan officer of record was a man named Preston Ames. I had never heard that name in my life. I pulled my credit report while I was still on the phone with her, my hands cold enough that I fumbled the keyboard twice. There it was, $410,000 in commercial debt attached to my name for over a year, quietly wrecking a credit score I had spent a decade building with the same precision I brought to every retaining wall I had ever designed. That night, I called my mother. I want you to hear exactly how that conversation went because I've replayed it more times than I can count, and I still hear the same 5 words when I can't sleep. Mom, did you put my name on Chase's business loan? Silence. 3 seconds. 4. An eternity dressed up as nothing. We were going to tell you, she finally said. Tell me what? Rustling on the line, my father's voice, taking over the phone the way he always did when things got difficult. This is family, Vivian. Chase needed the loan. You have a stable income. We decided you could handle it. You decided? I repeated, without asking me. We raised you, he said, as if that answered anything. This is what family does for each other. I paid off my own student loans, Dad, every cent on my own. You gave Chase $70,000 outright. That's different. It's always different when it benefits Chase. My mother took the phone back, and her voice had that particular wet edge it always got right before the tears started, the weapon she'd wielded my entire life with surgical precision. If you loved this family, Vivian, you wouldn't make this so difficult. I forged my signature. That's not difficult. That's a crime. Don't be dramatic, my father snapped, back on the line. We used your name on some paperwork. It's not a crime when it's family. It is, actually. It's exactly a crime. There was a long pause, and then my father said the thing that told me everything about why this had happened. We don't have the money, Vivian. Cascade wouldn't approve Chase without a stronger guarantor. Your credit was the only one solid enough. There it was, the truth underneath every justification that had come before it. They hadn't asked me because they knew, with total certainty, that I would say no, so they simply removed the asking. You're 34, my father added, his voice edged with the same disapproval he'd carried my whole life. No husband, no kids of your own to provide for. What do you even need that credit score for? I hung up without answering. Some questions don't deserve a response. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my laptop and did the math instead, the way I do every problem, methodically, without emotion, because emotion doesn't solve anything a spreadsheet can't first illuminate. If that loan defaulted with my name attached, my credit would be damaged for up to 7 years, collections calls, possible lawsuits from the lender. And in my industry, where clients and municipalities run credit and background checks before awarding contracts, a defaulted $400,000 guarantee could end my firm before it had the chance to fully bloom. This wasn't just about money. It was about the entire structure of the life I'd built with my own 2 hands, the one thing in this family that had never once depended on anyone else's approval. At 1 a.m, I called Priya Nayar. We'd met in graduate school. She'd gone into finance law. I'd gone into landscape architecture. And somehow, across a decade of different cities, we'd stayed close enough that I trusted her with things I told no one else. Vivian, it's 1 a.m. I know. I'm sorry. I need help. I told her everything. The letter, the phone call, my father's flat admission that they'd used my name without asking because they knew I'd refuse. If you didn't sign this, she said, suddenly wide awake, this is fraud, forgery, identity theft, potentially bank fraud on Cascade's end too if they didn't verify you properly. This is serious, Vivian. What do I do first? Request the loan file. You have a legal right to any documents bearing your name and signature. And do you have anything at all showing you never agreed to this? I thought immediately of my folder. 3 years earlier, when Chase had asked me to co-sign that canning line lease, I'd sent him an email laying out in plain, unambiguous language that I would never co-sign a loan or guarantee for his business under any circumstances. I'd saved it, the way I save everything. Forward that to me the second we hang up, Priya said. That email is worth more than you know. She told me something that night I haven't forgotten since. A forged signature isn't just theft of money, Vivian. It's theft of your word. Someone decided your name could be used without your consent, and that's the part you fight for, not just the number. I found the email at 3 in the morning, read it twice, sent it to Priya before the sun came up. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house for what was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner. I went because I needed to look them in the eye when I said what needed saying, not because I expected anything good to come of it. The driveway had more cars in it than usual. My stomach tightened before I'd even parked. Inside, it wasn't just my parents and Chase, it was my Aunt Bev, my cousin Renata, and Chase's fiancée, Marisol, all seated around a dining table like a jury already deliberating. This wasn't dinner. This was an intervention aimed entirely at me. Chase stood first, arms crossed, his charm nowhere in evidence. We all know why we're here. Do we? I didn't sit down. Your brother needs this loan to survive, Vivian. This family needs you to stop making everything about yourself. I didn't sign anything. My voice steadier than I felt. You forged my name. You said you'd help him eventually, Chase snapped. At my dad's birthday last year, you said you'd think about the canning line. Thinking about something isn't consent, and that was a different request I already declined in writing. A family doesn't need things in writing, Aunt Bev said, shaking her head like I'd said something obscene. This family clearly does, since apparently my name can end up on a $400,000 loan without me ever agreeing to it. My mother was already crying, the soft, practiced tears she'd perfected over 30 years of getting exactly what she wanted from people who loved her too much to watch her cry. My father stood, his chair scraping hard against the floor, and the whole room went silent in the way rooms go silent right before something breaks. Then you leave us no choice, he said. No choice? About what? Chase will testify you agreed to help him, my father said. We all heard you say it at my birthday. I looked at my brother. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just stood there, arms folded, letting our father do what our father had always done. Make the decision, deliver the ultimatum, and let everyone else absorb the fallout. Only one person at that table hadn't said a word the entire time. My Uncle Walt, my father's younger brother, sat quietly at the far end, a glass of iced tea untouched in front of him. When I finally looked at him, his eyes held something none of the others did. Not judgment, something closer to recognition. I gathered my coat and my keys, and whatever composure I had left. I'll be in touch through my attorney, I said, and walked out. Behind me, I heard my mother wail, heard Aunt Bev mutter something about ingratitude, heard everything except an apology. But Uncle Walt's face stayed with me the entire drive home. I was almost to my car when I heard footsteps behind me on the gravel. Uncle Walt, moving slower than I remembered, his breath visible in the cold March air. Vivian, wait. I turned. He caught up, steadying himself against my car door. I'm sorry, Uncle Walt. I can't sit through that. You shouldn't have to. He was quiet a moment, choosing his words like careful people do. I found out about the loan 2 months ago. Tried to talk your father out of it. He wouldn't hear it. Never does once his mind's made up. Something cracked loose in my chest. All those years of wondering if I was the problem, if my need for boundaries made me somehow defective, and here was someone finally telling me I wasn't imagining any of it. Check the notarization date on the loan documents, he said quietly. Something about the timeline never sat right with me. What do you mean? Just check it. He squeezed my arm gently. Your grandmother would be proud of you for standing your ground like this. She never could, not with your grandfather. Always wished she had. I hugged him, brief and careful. Then I got in my car and drove home through the dark. No radio, just the hum of the highway and the growing certainty that I was about to find out exactly how deep this went. If you've ever had your own family decide something about your life without ever asking you, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments. You're not alone in this, and neither am I. And if this story is resonating with you so far, hitting that subscribe button really does help stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. Under federal lending law, I had the right to request the complete loan file for any account bearing my name. I filed the request the following morning, and Cascade Business Capital processed it within 12 business days. When the envelope finally landed on my kitchen table, I sat with it unopened for a full minute, the way you sit outside a doctor's office before a result you already suspect. I wasn't wrong to suspect it. The personal guarantee document was 11 pages long, and my signature appeared on pages 4, 7, and 11. I studied it under my desk lamp beside my actual signature on my driver's license and 2 signed client contracts. The differences were subtle to a casual eye, but I don't have a casual eye. I spend my professional life reading survey lines to the millimeter. My V starts with a small hook that curls back on itself, a habit from rushing through blueprint approvals for a decade. The V on these documents was rounder, more deliberate, drawn by someone who had studied my signature without ever watching me actually write it. Then I checked the notarization date, exactly as Uncle Walt had told me to, January 9th of the previous year. My stomach dropped before my mind had even finished the calculation. I pulled up my old calendar and scrolled back through the entries. January 7th through 10th, Pacific Northwest Landscape Architecture Conference, Scottsdale, Arizona. I had been over 1,000 miles away giving a presentation on stormwater retention systems when someone in Oregon supposedly watched me sign a $400,000 guarantee in person. I had the boarding pass, I had the hotel folio, I had a photo my firm's social media manager had posted of me at the podium, timestamped January 9th, 11:14 a.m., the exact window the notarization claimed I'd been standing in a Beaverton office signing my name. Someone had forged my signature. Someone else, a licensed notary, had certified a lie. I forwarded everything to Priya that night. Her reply came back in 4 minutes. This is exactly the kind of documentation we needed. We're not just defending anymore. We're going on offense. Priya filed a formal document request as part of building our case, requesting Cascade's internal file, including any correspondence tied to my loan application. The lender's compliance department, facing a formal fraud allegation, complied within 2 weeks, standard practice once fraud enters the conversation. What came back changed everything. Priya called me on a Thursday evening, and I could hear it in her voice before she said a word. That particular sharpness she gets when she's found something that matters. "Vivian, sit down. Just tell me. There's an email chain between Chase and the loan officer, Preston Ames. I want to read it to you exactly as written. Email 1 from Chase, dated December 28th. Is there any way to add my sister as guarantor without her needing to be physically present for signing? She travels a lot for work, and it's hard to get her in for an appointment." Email 2, Preston's reply. If she has given power of attorney to a family member or can complete a verified remote notarization, we can accommodate that. Otherwise, we'd need her present in person for the notary. Email 3, from Chase. She can't do remote signing easily, bad reception where she travels. My dad can handle the paperwork on her behalf, if that works. Is that okay on your end? Email 4, Preston's response. As long as the documents come back properly notarized. Meaning Preston Ames either didn't know or didn't care that my father was about to forge my signature and have someone stamp it as legitimate. He cut every corner that mattered. No ID verification, no confirmed consent. That's a massive compliance failure on Cascade's part, on top of the forgery itself. I sat in my kitchen reading those emails on my phone, feeling like I was watching my own robbery play out in slow motion, while everyone involved assumed I'd never find the footage. Priya advised filing a formal police report, not because it would necessarily result in criminal prosecution, but because it would create an official record, independent of whatever happened in civil proceedings. I drove to the Washington County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday morning and handed over copies of everything: the loan documents, my flight records, the conference photo, the email chain. The detective who took my statement, a calm, unhurried woman named Detective Ruiz, told me it would take time, but that the documentation I'd brought in was, in her words, about as clean a fraud file as I've seen. A week later, she called. Ms. Calloway, based on what you've submitted, we're opening a formal investigation into forgery and identity fraud. We'll be reaching out to the notary of record and to Cascade's loan officer. What does that mean for me right now? It means keep documenting everything. Save every message you get from your family from this point forward. It may become relevant. I saved everything. I'd learned that lesson years before I ever needed it. 3 weeks before the mediation hearing, my phone buzzed late one evening with a message from an account I didn't recognize until I saw the name attached. Uncle Walt, clearly guided through setting up his first-ever social media account with someone patient enough to walk an 81-year-old man through setting it up. I tried to stop them, Vivian. They wouldn't listen. I'm proud of you for not backing down. I read it 3 times, not because of what it said exactly, but because it was the only message from anyone in that family in the entire ordeal that hadn't asked me for something.
That night, I reread the email I'd sent Chase 3 years earlier, the one where I'd refused, in writing, to ever co-sign anything for his business. I'd saved it out of nothing more than habit. Now it might be the single piece of evidence that mattered most. If you're still with me here, I want to know, would you have paid to keep the peace, or would you have fought the way I did, even knowing it might cost you the whole family? Tell me honestly in the comments, and if you want to know exactly what happened when we finally sat across the table from my parents, hit that subscribe button now, because what happened next changed everything. Priya spent the next 6 weeks turning a folder of saved emails into what she called, only half joking, an evidentiary fortress. We requested Cascade's full compliance file under the fraud investigation. We subpoenaed the notary's records. We compiled a signature comparison from an independent forensic document examiner named Dr. Ahmet Suleiman, who specialized precisely in the kind of case I now, unbelievably, found myself living inside of. Dr. Suleiman's report was 9 pages of technical language that boiled down to one devastating sentence. The questioned signatures exhibit consistent variance from the known exemplar signatures in stroke pressure, letter formation, and pen lift pattern, indicating a probability exceeding 94% that the questioned signatures were not produced by the same writer as the known exemplars. 94%. My entire professional life had trained me to trust numbers over feelings, and that number told me something I already knew in my bones. Someone else had written my name, and science could prove it. We also pulled the notary's log. Oregon notaries are required to maintain a journal of every transaction, including the identification method used to verify the signer. The entry for my supposed appearance on January 9th listed my driver's license number as the form of identification presented. Except the license number listed didn't match mine. It was off by 2 digits, a small, careless error that told its own story. Whoever had handed that document to the notary, Gary Petrosian, a longtime friend of my father's from the same bowling league they'd shared for over 20 years, had either copied my license number from memory or simply guessed. Either way, the notary hadn't actually verified my identity. He had verified a piece of paper someone handed him and trusted the man standing in front of him because that man was his friend. Priya requested Gary's full notarial log as part of discovery, and it revealed something even more damning: 3 other transactions over the previous 2 years where the in-person signer's identification details contained similar inconsistencies. This wasn't a one-time lapse, it was a pattern, and the Oregon Secretary of State's office would eventually take notice of exactly that pattern. While we built the case, my parents escalated. My mother texted me twice that month, both times some version of the same accusation. "You're destroying this family over money, Vivian. I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't respond. I'd learned the hard way that responding only fed a narrative I could no longer control. Chase reached out once, in a message that started defensive and ended unexpectedly uncertain. "Dad told me it would be fine, Viv. He said you wouldn't even notice until the loan was paid off. I didn't think it through." It was the closest thing to an admission I'd gotten from him, and I saved it, the way I'd saved everything else. 2 weeks before the hearing, Priya called with an update from the criminal investigation running in parallel. Detective Ruiz had interviewed both Gary Petrosian and Preston Ames. Gary had, under questioning, admitted he'd notarized the documents at my father's kitchen table without me present, as a favor to an old friend who'd assured him it was just a formality since it was all family anyway. Preston Ames had been placed on administrative leave pending Cascade's internal compliance review. "They're not going to be able to avoid the forgery issue at the hearing," Priya told me. "Even if your parents' attorney tries to keep the focus on the birthday dinner conversation, the moment we introduce Dr. Suleiman's report and the notary's own admission, the entire foundation of their case collapses." I asked her the question I'd been carrying since the day the garnishment notice arrived. Do you think they knew it was illegal, or did they really convince themselves it wasn't? She was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, Vivian, I think they knew exactly what a forged signature is. I think they just decided the rules were different when it came to you." That answer sat heavier than I expected, not because it surprised me, but because saying it out loud, hearing someone else confirm it, made something I'd suspected my entire life suddenly undeniably real. I spent the final 2 weeks before the hearing in a strange, focused calm, the same calm I bring to a difficult client presentation, where preparation replaces panic if you let it. I reviewed every document. I rehearsed my testimony with Priya until the facts felt less like wounds and more like blueprints, precise, provable, load-bearing. 2 nights before the hearing, Uncle Walt called me directly, his voice careful the way it always was when he was choosing words with intention. "Whatever happens in there, Vivian, I want you to know you didn't do this. They did. Don't let anyone in that room make you carry their choices." "Thank you, Uncle Walt." "Your grandmother kept a folder too, you know. Different situation, different decade, but the same instinct. Some of us just know early on that we'll need proof someday that we weren't the ones who lost our minds." I hadn't known that about my grandmother. It struck me in that moment that whatever pattern existed in this family, I wasn't the first woman in it who learned to protect herself with documentation because no one else would protect her with belief. If you've ever had to become your own advocate because no one else in your family would stand up for you, I see you. Drop a heart in the comments if this story is hitting close to home tonight. And don't forget to subscribe. There's a new story like this one waiting for you every single day. Act 4. The Mediation Hearing. The hearing took place in a conference room at the Washington County Courthouse Annex, smaller and less theatrical than the courtroom scenes people imagine, but no less consequential. A long table, a court-appointed mediator named Judge Colette Fenwick sitting in as arbitrator given the complexity of the fraud allegations, and enough folding chairs along the wall for the small audience my family had insisted on bringing. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing the same charcoal suit I wear for municipal permit hearings, professional, unshakable, giving away nothing. Priya met me in the hallway, her leather folio already thick with exhibit tabs. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to watch my family lie under oath." They might, that's exactly what the evidence is for. At 9 o'clock, they arrived. My father first, in a suit I didn't recognize. My mother behind him, gripping his arm as though she might not remain standing without it. Chase came next, his usual polish dimmed, his eyes darting towards me and away again before I could hold his gaze. Aunt Bev and Renata took seats along the wall, a small gallery assembled to witness my supposed downfall. None of them looked at me directly, not once. Their attorney, a heavyweight man named Gordon Ashby with an expensive watch and the unhurried confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, opened with the story they'd built their entire case around. This is a matter of a broken family promise, a daughter who agreed in front of witnesses to support her family and reneged the moment the obligation became real. He called Chase to the stand first. My brother recited the birthday dinner story with rehearsed precision, how I'd said over cake that I'd think about helping with the canning line, and how the family had understood that as agreement. Even as he spoke, I watched him avoid looking anywhere near the exhibit table, where Priya's folders sat closed, waiting. When Ashby finished, Priya rose. She let the silence stretch a beat longer than comfortable before she spoke. Your Honor, my client never made a verbal agreement to guarantee any loan. Saying she would think about a request is not consent, and it's certainly not a signature. But more importantly, this entire narrative is irrelevant because there is a document in existence bearing my client's name that she didn't sign. She placed 3 items on the table: the loan guarantee, my flight records from the architecture conference, and Dr. Suleiman's report. Judge Fenwick's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened as she reviewed the pages. Counsel, are you alleging this signature was forged? I'm not alleging it, Your Honor. I'm demonstrating it. Priya asked me to stand and sign my name 3 times on a blank page, exactly as I always do. She placed my fresh signatures beside the guaranteed document on the display screen the mediator's office had set up for exhibits. The difference was visible even from across the room. The hook on my V, present in every signature I'd ever produced, entirely absent from the version notarized in my father's kitchen. Ms. Calloway's actual signature curves inward at the V. The signature on this loan document does not. She did not sign this. Someone else did, and a notary, a personal friend of the plaintiff's, certified it anyway without properly verifying her identity,
as his own notarial log confirms. In the gallery, I heard my Aunt Bev inhale sharply. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Priya wasn't finished. I'd also like to enter into the record an email exchange between Chase Calloway and Cascade's former loan officer, Preston Ames. She read it aloud, each line landing with the weight of a verdict already decided. When she reached the 4th email, Preston's confirmation that, as long as the documents come back properly notarized, we can move forward, I watched my father's jaw tighten and my mother's face drain of color. Ashby objected on relevance grounds. Judge Fenwick overruled him without hesitation. This goes directly to the central question of consent, counsel. I'll allow it. Priya turned to Chase. Mr. Calloway, did you write these emails? Chase's composure cracked in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. Yes, but my dad said he'd handle it properly. He said Vivian wouldn't even need to know until the loan was paid down. My father's head snapped toward his son. Chase, you told me it was fine. You said she'd never even notice. Judge Fenwick's gavel equivalent, a firm hand against the table, restored order, but the damage to their case was already irreversible. Everyone in that room had just heard my own brother confirm, under questioning, that my father had orchestrated a forgery with full knowledge of what it was. Judge Fenwick removed her glasses, set them down with deliberate care, and addressed the room. I've reviewed the plaintiff's claim of an oral agreement. I've also reviewed forensic evidence demonstrating that the defendant's signature on the loan guarantee does not match her known signature, flight records placing her out of state during the claimed notarization, and email correspondence establishing that the plaintiff's own son coordinated adding the defendant to this loan without her presence or consent. She looked directly at my parents. This proceeding does not exist to enforce a family's private expectations of one another. It exists to determine whether a legally enforceable obligation exists. Based on the evidence before me, I find no credible verbal agreement, and I find substantial, well-documented evidence suggesting fraudulent execution of the guarantee in question. I'm dismissing the plaintiff's claim in full and referring the forgery and notarization findings to the appropriate authorities for further review." My mother began to cry. Real tears this time, not the practiced kind. My father gripped the edge of the table. Chase sat frozen, staring at his own hands as though he no longer recognized them. Priya stood again before the room could fully absorb the ruling. "Your Honor, while the plaintiff's claim is dismissed, my client is also pursuing a counterclaim against Roland Calloway, Diane Calloway, and Chase Calloway for forgery, fraud, and damages to her credit and professional standing." A representative from Cascade Business Capital, seated quietly near the back, stood as well. "Your Honor, Cascade will cooperate fully. We've already begun our own internal compliance review of the loan officer's conduct." Judge Fenwick made a note. "The counterclaim will proceed to a formal hearing. Given the findings today, I'm also ordering an immediate review of the guarantee in question. If forgery is confirmed through the pending investigation, Ms. Calloway's name is to be removed from the loan entirely." She turned to me. "Ms. Calloway, is there anything you'd like to add?" I stood. My legs felt steadier than I expected them to. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, for what felt like the first time in years without flinching. "I never wanted any of this," I said, my voice quiet but even. "I didn't ask to be added to a loan I never agreed to. I didn't ask to be sued by my own parents. You chose this instead of simply asking me or accepting no as an answer. I hope someday you understand why that matters." I sat back down. No dramatic flourish, no accusation beyond the truth sitting on the record. Sometimes the truth is enough on its own. The mediator called recess. People began gathering their things in the particular hush that follows a verdict, not celebration exactly, but the exhale of a fight finally, formally over. We hadn't won everything yet, the counterclaim still had a road ahead of it, but the attack against me had failed, and it had failed publicly, on the record, in front of the very family who'd tried to use it as a weapon. Priya touched my shoulder in the hallway afterwards. "You did good in there." I told the truth. That's all I did. Sometimes that's the hardest thing in the world to do. Uncle Walt was waiting by the window at the end of the hall, looking older than I remembered him, but something in his face had shifted since the last time I'd seen him. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Your grandmother would be too." Behind us, raised voices. Chase pushing through the doors, Marisol trailing a few steps behind him, her face unreadable. "You destroyed this family," Chase said to me, his voice cracking. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say to that. Marisol's voice came next, but it wasn't aimed at me. "You told me the loan was completely above board. You told me your parents had it all handled legally." She wasn't asking a question, she already had her answer. I kept walking, their unraveling fading behind me with every step toward the elevator. 3 months after the hearing, the pieces finished falling into place, one after another, in the quiet, unglamorous way real consequences usually arrive. Cascade's internal compliance review confirmed what the emails had already made obvious. Preston Ames had violated multiple verification protocols and was terminated. The Oregon Secretary of State's office, acting on the notarial log discrepancies uncovered during discovery, revoked Gary Petrosian's notary commission entirely, citing the pattern Priya had flagged across multiple transactions. My name was formally removed from the loan, from every trace of it, from Cascade's system to the credit bureaus. My score began recovering within 90 days, climbing back toward the number I'd spent over a decade building. The county prosecutor's office reviewed the forgery referral and ultimately declined to pursue criminal charges against my parents directly, citing the family context and lack of intent to defraud the lender for personal enrichment beyond the loan itself, though Chase and my father both received formal warnings and civil penalties that would remain on record if anything similar were ever attempted again. My counterclaim settled without a full second hearing. My parents agreed to cover my legal costs in full, just over $18,000, and to submit a formal correction to the credit bureaus acknowledging the fraudulent origin of the guarantee. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about someone, somewhere, on paper, finally acknowledging what actually happened. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate exactly. My family had forged my name, dragged me through a legal process built on a lie, and let people who claimed to love me spend months believing I was the villain of my own life. Their consequence was a fine and a warning. But I had my credit back, my name back, my integrity fully mine again. Some victories don't feel like triumph. They feel like finally being able to breathe. That, it turns out, is sometimes enough. The family I knew before all this didn't survive it intact. Chase and Marisol postponed their wedding indefinitely. The last I heard through Uncle Walt, they were taking time to figure out whether trust could be rebuilt from what had been exposed in that mediation room. Copperline Ales was sold to a regional brewing group 8 months later, without my name attached to a single document this time. My parents, without my credit propping up their son's failing venture, had to formally restructure what remained of the debt on far less favorable terms. They sold the family lake cabin, the one place I actually had good memories of as a child, to cover the shortfall. My mother sent one email after everything settled. 5 words: "You ruined this family, Vivian." I didn't reply. Some accusations answer themselves. Aunt Bev called unexpectedly in the fall, her voice smaller than I remembered it. I didn't know the whole story, she admitted, about the forgery, the emails. I just believed what Chase told everyone. I told her I appreciated her saying so. It didn't erase the months of assumptions, but it reminded me that not everyone chooses to stay comfortably blind forever. Uncle Walt sent me a letter that autumn, his handwriting shakier than it used to be, but every word deliberate. "I've made some changes to my own arrangements. You deserve to know someone in this family stood fully behind you, not just in words." He passed away peacefully the following spring. I sat in the back row at the service. No one from my immediate family spoke to me. I was there anyway. That was enough. 6 months out from the hearing, right now as I'm telling you this, my life looks different than it did the day that garnishment notice landed in my mailbox. My firm brought on 2 new municipal contracts this year, the kind of work that requires a clean credit history and an unblemished professional record, exactly the things my parents had nearly cost me without ever asking my permission. My business partner, Elena, pulled me aside after we signed the second contract and said, "I've watched people fold under half of what you went through this year. You didn't. That's not luck. That's backbone."
I started therapy for the first time that summer, not because I was broken, but because I finally wanted to understand why I'd spent 3 decades accepting scraps of attention from people who reserved their real warmth for someone else. My therapist, Dr. Okafor, said something early on that I still turn over some nights. The people who are supposed to protect us sometimes teach us, instead, to accept being unprotected. Healing is the slow work of unlearning that lesson. I'm still unlearning it, a little more each week. I built a small, deliberate circle of people since then. Priya, Elena, a handful of friends who check in on me because they want to, not because they need something from me. Uncle Walt's absence still catches me some mornings, but I carry what he told me in that hallway like a small, steady weight in my pocket. You didn't do this. They did. Last month, I wrote a letter to my parents that I never intended to send, a practice my therapist suggested, a way to say the things that needed saying without requiring anyone else's response to make them true. I sat at my kitchen table and let the truth come out in full. Mom and Dad, I loved you longer than I probably should have, given what you were willing to do to me. I spent my whole life trying to earn attention you gave to Chase without condition. When I set a boundary, you called it selfishness. When I protected myself, you called it betrayal. I didn't destroy this family. The forgery did. The decision to steal my name rather than simply accept my answer did. I was your daughter. I deserved to be asked, not used.
Maybe one day I'll forgive you for this. Maybe I won't. Either way, I'm done waiting for an apology I no longer expect to receive. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. I'm finding mine without you. I read it 3 times, let everything move through me the way it needed to, and then I deleted the file. The writing itself had been the point, not the sending, just the honest reckoning with what happened and what it cost me, laid out in words I no longer needed to hide. On an ordinary Saturday now, sunlight comes through my kitchen window while I drink coffee and read blueprints for a new client project, a public garden space the city commissioned for a neighborhood that's never had one before. There's a quiet in my apartment that used to feel lonely, and now, most days, feels like freedom. I still think sometimes about what my father asked me on the phone that first terrible night. What do you even need that credit score for? I have an answer now, clearer than I could have given him then. I need it for a life no one can quietly siphon from without my knowledge, for the right to say no and have it actually mean no. For mornings exactly like this one, steady, unremarkable, entirely my own. On my bookshelf sits a small framed photo of Uncle Walt and me from the last dinner we shared, just the two of us, the week before the hearing. He's laughing in it, really laughing at some terrible pun I no longer remember. On the back, in his uneven handwriting, the strongest people are the ones who know when to walk away. I did walk away, not because I stopped loving the family I came from, but because I finally understood that loving myself had to come first. They called me selfish, cold, the daughter who chose her own name over her family's comfort, but I didn't choose my name over my family. I chose the truth over a lie and my own signature over one someone else decided to write for me. Some families build you up. Mine, in the end, taught me something different, that no is a complete sentence, that keeping records isn't paranoia, it's protection, and that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who understand you least, while the people who choose to stand beside you when it costs them something become the family that actually matters. I didn't win because I had the sharper lawyer, although Priya is without question sharp. I won because I never stopped believing my name was worth protecting. I think often about the version of me who almost didn't check that notary date, who almost let the exhaustion of fighting an entire family win out over the quiet, stubborn instinct to keep one folder of saved emails just in case. It would have been easier in the short term to simply agree to their terms that night at the dinner table, to accept the guarantee as a fait accompli, and spend the next decade quietly paying down a debt I never agreed to just to keep the peace, just to stop being called selfish at every holiday gathering. I understand now why so many people choose that path. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you tired in a way that's very hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived inside a family built around one favored child. But I also know with total certainty now what that choice would have cost me. Not just the money, though $410,000 is not a small thing to carry silently for a decade. It would have cost me the last shred of belief that my own judgment mattered, that when I said no, it was supposed to mean something. Every boundary I let them erode would have made the next one easier to erode too, until there was nothing left of the woman who built a landscape architecture firm from a folding table and a laptop, one exacting, unglamorous decision at a time. I don't know if my parents will ever fully reckon with what they did. Some people spend their whole lives protecting a story about themselves that can't survive contact with the truth, and I've stopped expecting to be the one to crack that story open for them. That work, if it ever happens, will have to be theirs. What I do know is that I finally stopped waiting for their permission to believe my own version of events. That, more than the settlement, more than the restored credit score, more than any of it, is the part of this story I'm proudest of. If this story meant something to you tonight, if you've ever had to fight for your own name, your own boundaries against people who should have simply respected them from the start, thank you for staying until the very end. I see you, and you are not alone in this. Drop your own story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if tonight's story resonated, come back tomorrow because there's a brand new silent victory story waiting for you, and trust me, you will not want to miss it.